Hello and welcome to Economy 2.0, brought to you by the Silvio Gesell Foundation and the Henry George School. My name is Josh Sidman. First, I'd like to let you know about our upcoming episodes. On Tuesday, June 3rd at 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll talk with Willem Boyder. Willem is an economist with a distinguished academic career, having held positions at Yale University, the London School of Economics, Cambridge, and Princeton universities. He was also the chief global economist at Citigroup from 2010 to 2018. He's been a sharp critic of the abuses that led to the great financial crisis and has also advanced proposals, some based on the work of Silvio Gesell, to avoid repeating the mistakes that led to that meltdown. He's also the author or co-author of 78 peer-reviewed articles and 8 books. And then on Tuesday, June 17th at 1 p.m., we'll welcome George Lovegrove. George is from the UK, but currently resides in Dubai, where he's a full-time developer in the crypto and Web3 space. He's the founder of the Web3 Association, which is an informational resource for crypto developers. He's also an advocate for the idea of using Silvio Gesell's proposal for demurrage, or depreciating currency, as a treasury funding mechanism for crypto ecosystems. And he's also the creator of a proposed alternative economic/governance model that he calls contributionism. All right, just a few words about how this show works. Economy 2.0 is meant to be a conversation. Anyone in the live Zoom audience is welcome to join the conversation at any time. If you'd like to do so, please use the raise hand function on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If you have your camera turned on, I'll add you to the screen when it's your turn. You're free to use the Zoom chat, but I won't be able to read it during the episode, and it will not be included in the recording. So if you have something to say, I encourage you to raise your hand and join the conversation. Please be aware that these sessions are recorded and will be shared on the YouTube channels of both the Silvio Gesell Foundation and the Henry George School. Okay, let me bring in today's guest. Phillip Ullmann joins us from London. In his previous career, Phillip was the head of the Cordant Group, which was the UK's largest independent staffing agency with a workforce of over 100,000 people. He's a columnist for The Telegraph and a frequent commentator on various TV networks. Phillip describes himself as a social entrepreneur and currently serves as the chief energizer of the Manna Journey, a new streaming platform that focuses on economics and politics. Phillip and I first connected about a year and a half ago in connection with the ideas of Silvio Gesell. Like myself and many of the previous guests on this show, Phillip is concerned about the long-term viability of the conventional economic system and has some original ideas for an alternative model which is based in part on biblical principles. I look forward to hearing more about that today. But Phillip, why don't you get us started by telling us about your background, your previous career, and what happened in the course of that career to cause you to veer off the beaten track and start thinking about the need for alternative economic models.
Okay, thanks for inviting me, Josh. Let me just start by saying I'd love it if as many of you who are listening could put your hands up to join us, because I think from my experience, the more people that participate in these exercises, the more rich the conversation. So if you could take up Josh's offer, and as many of you as possible, that would be great. Yeah, so as Josh says, I started off, how old? I'm now 60. It's telling my age, but I started in Cambridge University. I read engineering. We had a family business that manufactured steel wire, based in Watford, just outside London. And so the idea was that I'd study engineering with a view to joining the family company. So I graduated in 1988 and joined that business, and fortunately found that I was able to transform every aspect of the business very quickly. We were able to massively increase the profit by doing all the normal things, by effectively reducing the labour force. I looked at labour productivity, and I found that, in fact, that we were in a typical 8-hour shift, a worker would only be working for literally 2 hours, and we had umpteen workers only working 2 hours in a shift. So I started reorganising the workforce and started to initially we had 4 machines operated by 3 operators, but in the end, anyway, we halved our productive workforce, and we changed every single aspect of the business in the period of about a year and a half. I enjoyed that and saw, fortunately, that I was able to influence a business that had been around for a long time. But the trouble with manufacturing, even then, this is back in 88, was there was no future in the UK. We could see that because of what was happening in China. Work was moving away from the UK, jobs were moving away from the UK. So even though I was able to transform the business, I realized there was no future, and the family sold the business in about 1990. So then I had to start again, and my wife said, "You should become an accountant." I didn't even know anything, but we were so used to doing things and building things as a family that I hadn't even thought about accountancy as a career. And anyway, I trained as an accountant. It was good training. I was at KPMG, qualified as an accountant, did some work in tax, did an MBA at the same time just to get breadth of experience. But accountancy wasn't for me. There wasn't enough scope for actually being creative. So I then left KPMG, worked for Sainsbury's, for a big retailer. Again, massive opportunities for achieving change. I was involved in an internal review department. I found when I looked at parts of the business, there were massive opportunities to increase productivity. But I realized by that stage that not everybody was as focused on the wealth of the business as I was. That politics intervenes, and you don't get optimum solutions. So one example, I was in a warehouse and I saw a row of roll pallets waiting to go onto a lorry, one of these, and there were only literally 2 pallets to go into a whole juggernaut, HGV. I said, 1 minute, that's crazy. You're taking 2 items to a single store. That's got to be ridiculously expensive. And they said, yes, we know it, but we don't know what to do about it. It's systemic. They had no way of actually resolving these kind of problems. I began to realize that systems and politics can stop an organization operating as effectively as it might. Anyway, so I left there, having seen opportunities, but not being frustrated, not being able to make it actually happen. And I went to a creative imaging company. Again, I was recruited by a company doctor, and I was given a color repro business which retouched images. This was before the Apple Mac. This was the early days, and you retouch images, charging £300 an hour. And what they had in that business was a pricing department. They would take an image and said, "It's going to this ad agency. Let me guess a price that they'll be prepared to pay." They were literally guessing a price which is relevant. You'll see later on in our discussion. And I said, 1 minute, what about checking the amount of time that was actually spent on it? If you charge £200 now, you may find you're undercharging. And we tried it, and we found, in fact, they were massively undercharging. So again, I was able to enhance the bottom line of this company. But what I'm not good at is towing the line. I was working for an Anderson Consulting, somebody who'd been a management consultant who was telling me to do nonsense. He had no experience of real business, but he was a typical consultant who said in words that no one understands, concepts that we all understand. I hope I'm not offending any consultants, but that was my experience with anyway. So I ended up getting sacked because despite making huge amounts of money, because I wasn't towing the line, I was just making money for the company, ended up being sacked. And to cut a long story short, I then was told by Trevor Grice, who was the CEO, that Philip, of all the people that I've employed here, you're the one that will succeed, but you have to be your own boss, which was the best piece of advice I've ever received. He realised that I had to lead. So I then joined another family company that we had, which was in security. We provide security guards, turned over about 12 million, employed 1,000 security guards. And that was in 1996. And over the space of the next 24 years, I was fortunate enough to build it into a company turning over 1.2 billion, internationally, UK, Ireland, all over Europe and Australia. And we were no longer in just security, we were in facility services, recruitment, staffing agencies. So I'd moved it significantly. But I wasn't content. During the course of this journey, I realized there was something wrong. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but I realized there was something wrong. And at I think it was about 2016, Deloitte presented me an opportunity with a business that was called NHSP, the National Health Service Professionals, which operates the bank of doctors and nurses for the NHS. And they said to me, Philip, would you consider doing it as a social enterprise? And I didn't know what a social enterprise was, Josh. I had no idea what it meant. So I started researching what social enterprise was. And that was a kind of eureka moment. I suddenly started to realize that we were running our businesses completely with the wrong purpose and therefore not achieving what we should be achieving. So I had this now idea that we should run business for the sake of society, but I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea how to do it. So I got some lawyers in who helped me to look at the Sustainability Development Goals, SDGs, and we had to almost retrospectively work out what can we do, what purpose can we achieve in this business, which is huge, employing lots of people, but was not set up with purpose in mind, Josh. It was set up to make money, and that was the history of it. And we came up with 3 ideas. One was to get all of our workers paid a living wage. We supplied a lot of workers to the big retailers and the big warehouse operators, and they weren't being paid at the time a living wage. It was all a minimum wage. So I set about trying to ensure they could be looked after better and paid a living wage. I decided to set a cap on the highest paid salaries. They shouldn't be paid more than 20 times the lowest paid. And I also limited the drawings of the family, which they weren't too happy about. So, but this is all retrospective. I knew the business was wrong, but I had no idea what the answer was. I just knew that. So I tried these things, and they were abysmal failures. Josh. You couldn't do it because my customers were not interested in looking after the welfare of the employees. They had no interest in them. In fact, my competitors had no interest in the workers. And fundamentally, what I realized that I, by myself, even though we owned the company, couldn't actually achieve any change on the kind of scale that I was looking to achieve. So that takes me to 2020, which is when COVID came about. And to cut a long story short, we ended up selling the company over the next 2 or 3 years. And I realized that I wanted to do more work and actually finding out what should business really be about. How could we suddenly sort out a system which I started to realize was problematic, Josh. And the workers, just to give you a picture of the kind of thing that would be happening in our warehouses, we would supply a worker to a warehouse operator. The worker would be paid a minimum wage. They would be doing 18 miles of walking in a shift. And they were told what to do by a handheld device. There was no real autonomy. Many of these people were immigrants whose families were elsewhere in Europe. So they were, because of the arbitrage in wages, they were away from their family. They were living in hovels, really not very nice places. They were sharing beds where one person would sleep in the bed during the day, another during the night. Not the other kind of sharing beds, but over 24 hours. and they were living on a peck of biscuits. So I realised there's got to be something better than this, where you end up with a system where the workers are not catered for and not looked after. So what I did in 2020 is I decided to search wider for an answer to why, in my view, the business world was not functioning, it just didn't work. And I decided to look at the Bible. Now, I'm not a trained scholar. I went, after leaving school, I went for a couple of years to a Talmudical college, but I wasn't somebody who was engaged with the Bible. But what I did, as I always do, is I wanted to get the best people in the world to help me to develop a skill set, to actually understand what the Bible was saying. And with Zoom, suddenly they didn't have to be in England anymore. I was able to find the best people in America, in Israel. And I started actually finding that even as Jews, we don't properly study the Bible. We don't study the Bible scientifically, which is a much wider problem. We have a set of views that we impose on the data. So I, over the last 4 to 5 years, have been studying the Bible to look for the answer as to why business, why society is not working. And I believe I found it. Sounds crazy. The hitchhiker's going to the galaxy, the answer is 42. But it's true. It's something that came to me from rigorous study of the data. This is not based on one verse. It's based on hundreds of verses scientifically studied rigorously. And I realized that the answer was in the Manna. There's something called the obligation, which is remembering the 40-year journey in the wilderness when they actually ate manna. So I realized there was a solution, but I was trying, how does this solve the problems? So I started looking, which is where we got together, Josh. I started looking at money, because the manna was about how you apportion food, how you make sure that everybody's needs are met, how food is allocated, how work is allocated as well. We'll see in the end. So I studied the world of banking. And I started to understand how corrupt the world of banking is. So the first thing over time I began to realize was that money, we are led to believe that banks receive deposits, which we deposit, and they lend out those deposits. And that's the way, very basically, we're led to believe. But once I looked in detail, I realized that's not the case. What happens is, commercial banks actually lend money into existence. They create money, and they can create huge amounts of money. And I started to realize that's where the fundamental problem lies in the system, in the banking system, whereby banks that are private organizations, that are profit-making organizations, are allowed to create, to a large extent, as much money. They may have to keep a small percentage in reserve, let's say 10%, but they create huge amounts of money. When I looked at the history, Josh, I realized that this came originally from the concept of gold being deposited with goldsmiths. And the goldsmith, when you were selling, wanting to buy a field, rather than actually go to the goldsmith, collect your gold, retrieve it, and go back and pay for the field, that would be risky because you could be robbed by highwaymen on both ways, and it was risky. So what the bankers gave them a record, a deposit note, recording the fact the gold that they recorded, and they were using these deposit notes for the transaction. And the reason why, because it was much easier, because you didn't have to transport the gold, with much lower risk. And then what happens is the goldsmiths realize that the gold is staying put in the goldsmith because people don't want to move it. And they start to create 9 or 10 times as many notes as there is gold deposited in the goldsmith. Now that is just fundamentally criminal. That's a crime because you're fabricating notes for gold deposits that don't exist. And of course, it's straightforward theft because the bankers can do whatever they want with those gold deposits. The goldsmiths can, if they want, use them to buy stuff themselves. They can charge interest on them. It's fundamentally a corrupt and dangerous model. But that eventually evolved into what we call fractional reserve banking. So the model that we actually have is never going to work, Josh. It's just never going to work because it allows private organizations to create huge amounts of money, which effectively corrupts the system. It inflates asset prices. House prices are inflated. And share prices are inflated. But house price inflation means that people that don't have a house will never be able to buy a house because they can't get onto the ladder because of this constant inflation of asset prices. So I began to realize that fundamentally the problem was money. The actual problem was money. And my initial thoughts was the problem was that the limitless production of money. Huge amounts of money are created and there's no control of how it's created, which brought me on to Silvio. We spoke about that. We can discuss that in due course. So my first idea was to find a way to limit the amount of money, because limitless amounts of money means you get inflation, you get problems with the system, you have no stability in prices, and people can't get the assets they need. So I thought the best way, you can't go back to a gold standard. That was tried, and gold, again, is a commodity, can be manipulated, etc. So the gold standard we tried and hasn't worked. So the idea that I had was what we called people-powered money. We limited the amount of money based on the population. And therefore, the amount of money, and I saw in the Bible that the manna literally was provided every day. Okay, so it was a daily, it dealt with the needs of the day, which meant that you couldn't save it overnight, which it would decay. So it actually had to be used the very same day. And therefore, that took me on to say, okay, so what is it saying that the money only lasts a day? Which took me on to Sylvia Gesell, because as you and I know, that there's three functions of money based on what the economists teach us. There's a unit of account, there's a store of value, and a means of exchange. And I started saying, 1 minute, if the Bible says that you have to use it the same day, that means it's actually of the moment. It's something real. It's something for the day. And I started to think, well, how does that translate to what the economists say? So the first thing I said, okay, unit of account, well, that's a record of what's happened historically. That's what a unit of account means. You record what's happened, but that's finished, Josh. That's already happened. That fundamentally is history and shouldn't be relevant to the decisions I make today, because that's past. In fact, what I realized is, let's say a house, let's say it takes 10 man years to build a house. That's what it took historically. So if you say money is a unit of account, therefore, let's say it costs $50,000 or £50,000 to pay a worker. Therefore, you're going to, because you're taking into account the history, those 10 man years of work, you are saying the house can only be purchased for £500,000. So let's say that's an example. And therefore, because of that, you force an individual to go into debt because of what's happened historically. You said because a person can't earn £500,000 in a year. And therefore, the system, once you treat money as a unit of account, is going to be inflationary and also create debt, because people, what should really be a communal responsibility to build a house is now being imposed on a single person. And £500,000 is history. It doesn't matter because the house is now there. But as soon as you look at the history and say what's happened here, you're immediately going to inflate the value of everything based on the number of years or man years involved. So I realized the Bible is saying, no, unit of account, it's finished, forget about it. We're not dealing with today, and therefore I recognize that the function of unit of account just doesn't make any sense. Then I looked at the store of value. Of course, that's about the future. And as Sylvia Gesell says, it means that you don't cause money to flow around the system, because you get a return by actually saving it and pooling it for a future need which you don't have now, but you pool it. But what that means is you have more and more money in the system, because how much do you save? You don't know. People save huge amounts, which means, again, you increase the amount of money in the system, which again is going to be inflationary. One, it's going to be inflationary, it's going to increase prices. And two, it's going to result in problems not being resolved quickly, because you can hoard your money, which means you don't actually need to meet people's needs today, because you're better off storing it and reserving it. You have the right to reserve it because you're not focused on actually meeting the needs. So I recognize the Bible was saying to me, no store of value. That's also wrong. So the third function that was left was exchange. You need it to exchange for stuff. You need a means of exchange. I realized that once you've got what you need, you don't need any more. Again, therefore, by saying stuff that you don't need, you always are obliged to exchange for other stuff. That's also going to be inflationary, because once you've got what you need, your needs are met, but you're encouraged to exchange it for more and more stuff that you don't need. And that will, again, result in more and more money in the system and inflation. And fundamentally, all three functions of money, the store of value, the means of exchange, the unit of account, are creating a system which is out of control, where money is just growing exponentially, which of course it is. And that will never work. That's what the Bible said to me. So then I asked myself, okay, so if the economists are completely wrong, that it's not a means of exchange or a store of value, what is it? And again, the Bible answered that to me. It's about meeting needs. So what we all have needs, as and the word meeting needs is actually used with the Manna. We all have needs, and we have to have those needs met. And what the Bible says is the obligation of man is to meet the needs of other men. Of course, you have to meet your own needs, but thereafter, that everyone has an obligation to meet the needs of others, including, by the way, the land and the environment. Of course, that was also interesting, very interesting, that the Bible uses the word for man is Adam, the word for earth is Adama, which is the same word. So man and soil are actually the same thing. If you look at science, it's actually true, because 95% of soil is microbials, 95% of man is microbials. So effectively, to care for man, you have to care for the soil as well, and you have to care for the environment. So I suddenly started to realize that, in fact, we've got money completely wrong. In fact, money is the problem. And my idea of people-powered money was wrong. And this was made clear to me by a woman called Diana Fitch, who I spoke to only a couple of weeks ago. And she, in fact, said stuff, Josh, which took me back to a conversation that you'd introduced me to a group of people in 2023 who talked about alternatives to money. And I'll be honest, at the time, it was above my head. I didn't understand what they meant. I really didn't understand. I wasn't sufficiently conscious to understand what they meant. But Diane was very strong in this. She'd been involved with the Bristol pound, which was similar, based on Wurgle, on Gesell's ideas, similar to Wurgle, it's been tried a few times. And the concept of the money's a problem. We've got people who are unemployed. We've got work that needs to be done, but because money doesn't work, money effectively means that we don't actually solve problems effectively. And she actually had experience with the Bristol pound, which had failed. And so I got the idea of people-powered money, which is essentially a Wurgle type shilling, money that Gesell talks about, which said, Philip, no, you're wrong, because we've tried it, it doesn't work. The answer is bigger than that. The problem is not it's actually money full stop. Money, we need to find a system which doesn't need money. And I thought, this is balmy. The natural reaction is, you're balmy. There's no way we can actually develop a system which doesn't require money. But then I looked to the manna, and the manna didn't require money. If you look at the Bible story, in fact, what you see is in Egypt, the story involved 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. And to cut a long story short, Joseph interprets a dream, and actually, he initially suggests what I would call stewardship, which is important, whereby um, the goods, the grain which is produced is used based on stewardship or trusteeship, where to allocate goods based on need, you don't need money because people need food to eat. All you need to know is who has what need, and the people with the goods, the resources, actually can use those what they've got, can find, they're obligated to meet the needs. It doesn't need money. So Joseph's solution involved no money at all, and that's what he suggested. Pharaoh says no. He actually says, I want to use your intelligence, your data, but I want to look after myself. So what he does is he introduces a market. And in year one, because of course the only people with food are in Egypt, no one else has food, he can charge whatever price he wants. And that's the problem of pricing. It made me realize that. So because you need food, people swapped all of their money for food because otherwise they die. And what that's saying is, to me, and in the first year, all of the money went to the king. The whole lot. He got all the money in the whole of Egypt and Canaan. And then afterwards, once he's gobbled up all the money, the next thing they do is exchange. They say, 1 minute, we want to survive. What about our animals, our vessels, etc.? And they, of course, are trading in a market where they're trying to survive. And in that first year, again, he then gobbles up all of the animals and all of the goods. He gets everything within a year. And then I started to realize that's what the message is. The message is money doesn't work. Why? And this is the fundamental realization. It's not scientific. The pricing of anything, Josh, is subjective. You can't. How do I know what you're worth, Josh? Let me ask you a question before I go ahead, because I'm talking too much. I'm rambling. I'm probably boring people. Josh, what do you understand by the scientific method?
What do I understand by the scientific method? Well, that's a bit outside of my house.
Anyone else? Is anybody in the audience that's prepared to engage in that question?
My best shot at it would be that it is a process of forming hypotheses, subjecting those hypotheses to experimentation, conducting experiments, observing the results, and then evaluating those results to form a conclusion as to whether or not the results support or do not support the initial hypothesis, and then repeat that process.
Okay.
Philip seems to have frozen up. Philip, I'm seeing you but not hearing you now. You froze up for a minute.
I don't know.
Okay, you're back. You're back.
I'm back. Good. Okay.
All right.
So
start with responding to my
yeah. Josh is the host now. I've lost you, Josh.
Yeah, I'm back. I think I'm having internet issues.
It's at your end. I don't think it's at my end.
Yeah, let me try to get this back under control here. Let's see. All right. Kuba, are you are you with us? Because I'm
Yeah, Josh.
kind of at a loss here. I've lost. I disconnected, and all of a sudden,
So
focus.
you're back now.
Yeah, I'm. Oh wait, start focus mode. All right.
Right.
All right. Now I need to add Phil back to the screen. All right. Here we are. So yeah, I think the bad connection was on my end. So if for my purpose, if I missed something, could you go back to responding to my answer to your
Yeah.
question about
Look, I think the scientific method, Josh, is very important. I think the only way of getting to the truth is to adopt the scientific method. And the bit that you didn't stress enough was the data gathering phase. You need to gather enough data at the beginning of the process to enable you to work out a hypothesis based on the data. So the first stage one is gather as much data as you need. And stage two is then to derive a hypothesis from that data. But the data has to be meaningful data. What we do, and mine is a classic example of that, is we don't actually look at the data and let the data speak to us. We actually have a preconceived idea, which we then impose on the data. So we don't actually honestly look at the data and say, what is the data saying to me? We actually have an idea which we superimpose on the data, which is we start with the answer and we impose it on the data. That's what most people do. So the stage one is gather as much data as you can and the relevant data. Two, develop hypothesis which is based on that data. And then three, you test the hypothesis in the real world to make sure that it actually works in practice. Because if you've got the sufficient amount of data and you've got the right hypothesis, you can then start to, the solution would work because it means you've got your analysis right. So that this third stage is actually testing your hypothesis. And of course, if you can't explain the real world, then you've got to go back to gather more data and to redevelop the hypothesis. So the key to scientific truth-seeking work is to gather enough data to be able to make the decisions and to develop the hypothesis from the data and to then test it. Now, that's what I'm doing, by the way, with the Bible. I haven't got time to explain it to you, but I'm actually looking at hundreds of instances the same way to make sure I've got the data really properly understood. So what people do is they look at a single verse and they decide what it means without looking at the data. They just don't look at all the incidents of that word. I do it scientifically. So what does that mean in terms of money? Because money is subjective, Josh, how do you work out what you're worth, you should be paid an hour compared to what I'm paid an hour, compared to the value of a piece of cheese or a piece of land? You can't do it, Josh. I mean, money is because fundamentally.
Hold on. I would answer that the market and negotiation among free participants in the market is the process for arriving at prices.
But there's no way of knowing what the right answer is, because the more the banks lend, take the example, the more the banks lend, the more that you can pay. But there's no objective answer. You have no, because again, how do you, first of all, markets don't work, as we know, because markets are controlled by whoever has control of the market. But the question you're missing is, how do you know that the answer is right? How do you know that a piece of property, because we know it's not right, because the value of property changes the whole time. So which was the right answer? Was the right answer, my parents bought the house for £6,000. It's now worth £2 million. Was the right answer £6,000? Was the right answer £2 million? It's fundamentally subjective. There is no right answer. So what that means is we put this. So this, by the way, came from Diane. It's not something I'd realised, but money is fungible. £10 is always the same as every other £10 because it's fundamentally a commodity. People, land are not the same. Everybody's different, and to arrive at an objective value of anything, it's just impossible. Can't do it. So what you end up doing is putting a veil, almost obfuscating the real world by putting this number in the middle that is made up. As I said to you before, the banks literally make up the money. No one's controlling them. Yeah, they just lend as much as they want, and over the years they've lent more and more and more, which has inflated asset prices, which means that it's not fulfilling its function of actually transmitting information, because there's no information in it, because it's made up. It's literally fabricated by the banks. It's lent into existence. So what we've done is created noise. We've got this number of money which actually doesn't hold any valuable information, and we make all the decisions based on a number which is meaningless, which means that everything is unscientific when we don't get to the truth. Is this making sense or not?
I would say that remains to be seen for me. I would say that the common ground that we share, that you and I share, and that we also share with Silvio Gesell and Henry George, is the belief that our existing form of money is flawed, that the that the process of money creation via private bank lending is absurd and represents essentially a theft of a public function by private market participants that should never have started in the first place and should not be tolerated in the present day. The question is, what takes its place? If we agree that is the wrong system, the question is, what is the right system? And that's what I'd like to investigate further with you. The concept that you describe of Manna, of providing for everyone's needs, is a lovely idea. I'd like to try to understand the mechanics of how that works. How, in the absence of money, which I would differ with a number of the things you said about the basic functions of money. I don't really see the unit of account function in the same way that you do as a measure of a historical quantity. I rather view it as the invention of a standard unit for comparing what are essentially incomparable quantities. How do you compare the value of an apple with the value of an egg? And
what I'm saying, Josh, is I'm an accountant. When you make decisions, you ignore the past. You've got to make a decision on the day. The past is finished, and that's history. Why are we making ridiculous decisions based? An accountant, you don't look at the historical cost when you make decisions because it's not relevant. And therefore, we've created so that's what I'm saying. It's just a mistake. You don't need it for decision making, and we don't.
I agree with that, but I don't agree that unit of account is a measure.
That's what unit of account is. That's unit of account is the history.
Yeah, I don't agree with. I think unit of account is essentially a unit of measure. It's like, what is an inch? An inch is a unit that we use to measure length. My understanding of money as a unit of account is that it is a unit for measuring value, which is the incommensurable quality that every good and service shares. But
I think that's means of exchange. We're confusing the different purposes, Josh. To value an item, that's the exchange concept of money. Yeah, money is a unit which you exchange. The unit of account is history. It's saying I need to keep an account of what's happened, and therefore, if you've done work for me previously over the previous few months, that's what it means. It's a method of accounting for history. Anyway,
one second.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
In the Gesell course, in the course that I taught on Gesell, I made the case that unit of count and medium of exchange should be considered as one combined function. I don't really want to get bogged down in debating.
I agree with you. The bottom line is we both agree, Josh, it doesn't work. It's the cause of the problems the society is facing, and we don't need to go into the technical philosophy. I agree with you, it's a distraction. But let me tell you what I think is important to note, and that is this. Economists, I listened to the Clive Menzies show, which you did before, and Clive made the same point. Economists don't talk about money. They don't want us to realize that money is the problem, and economists don't really talk about the true functioning of the bank and how money is lent into existence. And that's not part of the economic model. They don't want us to know that banks create money and banking is the problem and the whole system is fundamentally corrupt. But what I'm trying to show you is the problem is because it's not that you can't determine a price. There's no objective way of actually working out what anything is worth. And therefore you end up with a system where decision making is almost around money, and money has no purpose. Money has, and you can't objectively work out what anything is worth. So what you end up doing is creating an accounting system, double entry bookkeeping, an accounting system to support bank lending. And this is big, Josh. This is very, very important. So because the money is meaningless, it has no purpose. It's just something that's magicked into existence. Okay, we want to make more of it. Why? Because that's what we're told. We create more and more of it because that's good. It isn't.
Hang on. I want to push back on this.
Okay.
Money has no purpose. I would make the case that if we erased money from existence at this moment, I would say that most of the people currently alive on Earth would not survive 2 weeks, because money is a coordination mechanism that regulates an infinitely complex web of flows of goods and services that we all depend on for our very survival. And that if that coordinating mechanism were to suddenly disappear, I don't know how I would feed myself tomorrow. So I can't accept an assertion that money serves no purpose.
No. What I'm saying to you is no. The actual earning of money isn't a purpose. It's not saying the purpose is to meet the needs of people. It's the number itself is a number. It's an arbitrary number which doesn't actually build any purpose into. So what is a business? What's the purpose of a business in the Western world? Yeah, the purpose of a business is to make profit, to earn profit, which is a monetary valuation of the growth in the value of the balance sheet, whatever, of the company. Now that can be achieved, and that is a number. And it's a meaningless number, but it's a number that we have to achieve. And that can be achieved. That's what I did, by the way, Josh. We do it by making people redundant. We say, look, because it's got no purpose, therefore, if you can reduce the number of people you employ, and therefore your costs are lower, if you can produce more from the existing land by damaging it with insecticides and herbicides and all kinds of things that will do to the land, you make more profit. And therefore, this number itself is noise. There's no meaning in the number, is what I'm saying to you. It doesn't mean anything. £1 million, it's just a number. It's relative, and inflation becomes worth less and less. So what I'm saying to you, the problem is big, because what we've done, David Graeber talks about this. We've created what he calls BS jobs. What's happened over the last kind of 200 or 300 years is productivity has increased dramatically recently with computers, but with the Industrial Revolution, with the production of machines, which can do a lot of the hard work that was previously done by people. So what you then do is you say, okay, so reduce the amount of productive work, which we have. And what should then have happened, of course, is people should have more leisure time, because, of course, there's not as much time required. You're on a production line, and production line can produce much more per person. than they could before the Industrial Revolution. The trouble is, that's not what's happened. People are working harder in America, and they're working harder than ever. And what we've done is, because money has no purpose, we created meaningless jobs that have no purpose. So lots of layers in the hierarchy. We've got managerial, the concept of management, the concept of accounting is meaningless. The concept of law, I mean, most of the job, this is not me, this is David Graeber's work. He actually worked out that 95% of jobs, he asked people this, where actually people recognized there was no meaning with it, because they're not producing anything really, because the production has become much more efficient. And therefore, they're actually bureaucratic, pushy paper jobs. And most people, he admitted to him, that in fact the jobs were meaningless. So this is serious, because what it means is you get much more mental health issues. Once people are doing jobs where they're not actually caring for other people or caring for the planet, they're just doing stuff because they need to do stuff to put food on the table. There's no meaning in the jobs. And therefore we've ended up with 95% of jobs being meaningless, which is a massive problem, because you've got young people how do you make a decision? I was doing this with the name of my family only today, okay? And he wants to be able to support his family, and he's potentially a natural educator, but education is underpaid. You can't support a family on the job of on the salary of a teacher. So you have to look at merchant banking or at trading, because we haven't linked what we actually do to meaning and purpose. We end up doing something which makes money in order to put food on the table. Go on, I'm listening.
Okay, let me try to center this conversation. Like I said, we have an important piece of common ground, which is that the nature of our existing form of money is fundamentally flawed. But like I said, the question then becomes, what takes its place? And so my question for you is, how does this person who you just had a conversation with, who is a natural teacher, who was put on this earth to teach, how does that person transform his teaching services into food, shelter, clothing, entertainment, leisure, all of these things, in the absence of a conventional money?
Okay, so what you need to register is the needs, and those are not obfuscated by monetary value. We know we need food, which is meat and 2 veg, whatever it is. Once we start looking at food or clothing or accommodation, it's much easier to look objectively and work out how much food a person needs or how much accommodation, because those are simple concepts without the noise, without the intervention of money. And therefore we need to register what people need, a kind of needs register. And we all have, which is what the Manna was. They needed food. It dealt with food primarily. And people had to volunteer to use what they produced to meet the needs of others. Okay, so what you then do, you turn it all on its head. So you have a needs register, which is recording all the needs, and people have an obligation. So rather than the rights-based society that we live in, where it's all about power. So I work in exchange for money. Money is power. I then use that money to force people to give me stuff, because money has rights associated with it. And that is obfuscated by the noise around money, which has no measure, which isn't objective. We turn it around, and that's all coercive. It's all about force, because as soon as you talk about rights, my right is fighting against your rights, and we're fighting each other, and you end up with competition where people fight each other, and you end up with noise, and you end up with a system that doesn't provide needs. What the Bible is saying is, no, there's no right in the Bible at all. The Bible is all about obligations, about an obligation that I have to meet the needs. So once we have the needs recorded, let's say on a ledger, a blockchain, for want of a better word, because the technology is now there to record this in an immutable way. And also in a relatively simple way, people would then volunteer the other way around to meet the need, because from the resources they got from their own labour, from the land. Of course, central to this concept, by the way, is something that I'm sure Giselle has an issue with, and I know Henry George has an issue with, which is obfuscate, theft from the commons of land. Okay, and I think both Giselle has a different solution, Josh, as far as I understand, to Henry George. But again, we are stewards, we have obligations. So therefore, the land was a gift. You only take land by seizing it from the commons. So again, land should be used in a way of stewardship. So all of these things we build a ledger which records the needs, and people volunteer to meet the needs of the people. Now, what are the needs, Josh? The needs are meaningful employment. Now, that's where it changes, because I'm speaking to somebody in my family about what he needs. Now, that doesn't feature in the current market because it's all about money and power and food on the table. And therefore, you don't ever consider the needs of that individual, because that's not part of the calculation, as indeed are the needs of the land. So in this model, you'd be asking, what do you need? When I described this to somebody I was studying with earlier today, he actually worked in a kibbutz where and he had experience of the idea of a kibbutz type social commune. And he said, what happens if a person wants to be a cellist? They love music. The answer is they should be, if they have a natural inclination, that matters. We shouldn't force them into being a picker or being a driver if that natural inclination is to produce music, because that's what they want to do.
So let me reiterate my question: whether the person is put on earth to be a teacher or to be a cellist, what is the mechanism for, or is there a mechanism
Yes.
for organizing exchange? It sounds to me like you're saying that there is no exchange.
No. It's not exchange, it's meeting needs. It's an obligation to meet needs. Of course there is. So you have all the needs on the ledger, and people meet those needs with the resources that they've actually got. So there's a state, we match it, we use money to match it. There's no reason why on a ledger, by the way, because this is so big, before you do it, it's not a big bang, yeah? You've got to educate people into a new way of thinking. The answer is yes, the needs are there. The needs are not confused by money, they're real needs. And those needs can include healthy eating, healthy exercise, and all those things. And people volunteer to use the resources they've got to meet the needs. So it turns out that you meet needs by a ledger, yeah, but it's not as of right, it's as of obligation. So the matching happens online, and it's happening locally, by the way. It's much more local, because what we're trying to do, in fact, this is similar to what Clive spoke about. He'd read the same books as me and he mentioned Lelou, who talks about organizations operating at a different level of consciousness. And they also recognize that we need to move away from all the current models of operation, which are hierarchical, based on power and coercion, to a model which is not coercive. It's not coercive, it's not judgmental, and it's not divisive. So the answer is, yeah, the needs are recorded, yeah, and people volunteer to use what they've got to meet those needs. Now, that is can be done on a ledger, or it can be done locally, but you don't need money to do that. You can see the need, and once it's a real-time ledger, Josh, yeah, so once the need is met, the person will not get it again, because it's a daily system. You know how much food people need for a day. You know how much people need accommodation. So what you have is an open register of what people really need, and you can start to.
Let me probe whether I'm grasping what you're describing or not. So we had a teacher and we had a cellist, and those people are both doing their calling, what they were put on earth.
Yes, their calling. Good word. Yeah.
Let's say that there is a coincidence of wants. Let's say that the cellist needs teaching services, and let's say that the teacher needs cello music. Is there an exchange of cello music for teaching, or is there simply a direct provisioning of needs without any regard to something going in the opposite direction?
There's no need for exchange. Yeah, exchange is about rights. So what we're saying is, if I've got stuff that I don't need, yeah, because I've got my needs, I need to find a home for it. It's based on the concept of Giselle talks about things decay. Yeah, so the pressure of the daily system is, people they have their needs today. So you have to use the fresh food to meet the needs. Let's assume it's going to decay if you don't use it, and therefore you don't. If you've got the food that you don't need anything more, Josh. And therefore you will look on the ledger for as many people that need food. That you don't need a coincidence of needs. So it doesn't matter because it's peer to peer. Everybody's providing everyone else's needs, and therefore you don't need to find who's got somebody, because you're not swapping it. Peer to peer is God assuming that you always want an exchange. Once you get rid of the concept of exchange and everybody's obligated to provide needs, you don't need to find anybody matching you. You don't need any coincidence. It's not required.
Why does anyone need to work then? If their needs are going to be met by society based on registering of them in a public ledger, what is the incentive to spend time and effort engaging in work?
Because you need healthy work for a number of reasons. One, you need to meet the needs of others. It's a need. We're social beings. If I am simply taking, I'm going to become depressed, because I'm not. I need to care for others. I need to care for nature. So as soon as we know that people, when they get onto the benefit system, they suffer. They end up becoming mentally. It's horrible. Not actually meeting the needs of others. Simply being a taker is punishing, Josh. It's humiliating. It's inhuman, and it gives you mental health issues. So the answer is, you need to be meeting other people's needs. That's a need. You also need physical exercise, which you need to use your body, because if you're not physically exercising, you're eating pizzas the whole day, your body will not work. So you need to engage with other people. So the answer is that when you start to engage, recognizing needs, and it's a need to give to others, to working on the needs of others, it means that if you're not functioning and you're not actually meeting the needs of others, then effectively you're not leading a full life. Now, that need may be to need for the care for your family. If you've got children, that you have a need a mother might have a need to love and care for the children. That's a need. And that doesn't, again, so everybody recognizes they have.
All right. Honestly, my head is spinning trying to grasp what you're describing. So I'm trying to isolate of the puzzle and clarify them in my own mind to see if I can synthesize an understanding of what you're describing. So the next question that occurs to me is, let's say I'm the cello player. Let's say I'm the greatest cello player in the world. And let's say I go to people's houses and I play the cello for them. There's only so many hours in the day. Assuming that there is more need for cello music than I can provide, what is the coordinating mechanism for allocating my cello music? How do I know whose house to go to and whose house not to go to play cello?
So what I can do if I'm a good cellist is I can meet the needs. It's going to be local, by the way, and saying we've got to start rebuilding community. This proximity is important, because there's data in being close to people. You actually see and observe, and so you would work locally in small teams for the local community. Okay, if you haven't got enough cellists, then you'll take it upon yourself to train other cellists. If there's a register of need, more people want to hear chamber music or want to hear, then you will be incentivized to meet that need, because it'll be on the register. It's not being met, and therefore you will train more and more people to become cellists, to meet
Right,
that
but
need.
my point is that I believe that money and markets is a coordinating mechanism that enforces a discipline on how I allocate my limited ability to provide services. A cello player, you know, or any human being can only work X amount of hours per day per week. Let's say that there are thousands of people who want me to come and play music for them, and there are dozens of people who want me to come and teach them to play cello. What is the mechanism, if not money and markets, for telling me which of those houses to go to and play music and which of those other houses to go to and teach people to play the cello?
So we're talking a world of no coercion, of people building relationships. So I am a beautiful cellist. I will go to as many people as I can because my time is limited. I might want to do something else. I might want to also garden, you know, so I might combine the two. But if there's an uncharted need, and by the way, money doesn't do that well. Money's no good at allocating stuff, as you know, because it all goes to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. It doesn't work. And the system is not providing the needs. As we know, the young people can't buy houses, Josh. They can't buy houses. Because they can't get food. The workers that I was employing, were living off a packet of biscuits, living in unsatisfactory accommodation. It doesn't do it. This money is not good because money is, as I say to you, is subjective. There's no way of really assessing what is really happening and whether needs are being met. Once you take away the veil of money, you can see the need, which is what's sitting behind it, the needs of the land, the need of people. And that's much, much better way of ensuring the needs are met because you haven't got anything to intervene in the middle. And so if you see people meeting needs. This is similar, by the way, to what Clive has talked about on his ledgers. It's not altogether different needs. Clive also talks about, you know, he spoke about it last week, about a needs register. And people creating. It's very, very similar to Clive's, Josh, but not massively different to what Clive is saying. It's much, as I said to you from the beginning, the key is to get the scientific method working, where you have clean, honest data to enable you to make proper decisions which ensure that people's needs are met. So you have to have the clean data. Money isn't good data. Okay, go on.
I'm going to repeat the same question.
Okay.
I'm the best cellist in the world.
Yes.
And the best cello teacher. And there are more needs than I can personally.
Yeah.
So I'm going to train up a whole bunch of
Yes.
cello players so that over time the community becomes able to meet the needs.
Or I look on the database for other people will volunteer. I'm not the only cellist in the world. There are other cellists that will volunteer to do the same thing job. I'm not by myself. There'll be loads of cellists all over the place that will recognize the needs, and they will say, I can volunteer to help you.
But my question is, on Tuesday, how do I know whose house to go to for how much time to play cello for some people and to teach cello lessons to other people? What is the mechanism? What is the system whereby data is processed to enable me to know where to go and when and for how long?
Because I'm responsible for cello services to a community, and if I will decide how best to meet the needs, I've got to register with all the local people that need cello services. I want to meet those needs, and therefore I will meet those needs as best I can, and I will make the choices that I'm not going to be forced to, Josh. If we force people, they become robots. They become people that have, so the person will have the choice, and the people that show the appreciation that he goes to build healthy relationships will obviously get priority because they form a kind of relationship with them. But he will not say, if he cares for cello, he'll find he'll train people and recruit people, and he will become a facilitator of meeting the cello needs of as many people as he can. That's what he'll do. And that will be his responsibility in a very simplistic model. And you don't need money to do that. What you need is the data of who has the need. and the people that need it, and you treat them like human beings, and you build relationships with them. Because remember, not every person will understand his music style. I'm not a musician, but different people have different styles of music, and you're trying to meet the needs as best possible. But the best way of describing this, I think, is the Bergson example, which is a similar model that Lelou talks about in his business of how you rearrange society to be non-coercive. This is in Holland. District nursing was initially, which is, call it your cellist becomes a district nurse, okay? So initially, nurses would provide the needs of patients in their home, and I think this was paid for by insurance companies. Because of the traditional economies of scale, what happened in Holland is lots of small organizations that were delivering nursing services merged and merged and merged until you had 2 or 3 huge organizations that were delivering all the nursing services, okay? Now, what you do is you then start to treat people like machines, and you start to think about the economies of scale. And so what happened was they would actually start to specialize. Say, 1 minute, one nurse can do bandages, another can take blood, another can measure heart, whatever. So they ended up with specialist functions. There were loads of different specialisms, and they ended up with nurses becoming specialists in one particular area. They would then, as we do with productivity, we say, well, okay, let's put you on a time sheet. So they had to record how long each task took, and then eventually they would say, okay, you could only have 6 minutes to change a bandage, and then they would centralize the scheduling, and the schedulers would actually by computer work out the best route for the nurses to travel. And so what happened was the nurses ended up becoming robots. Yeah, because it's coercive.
Philip, I'm not hearing you. I don't know if something happened to your sound. Can anyone in the audience confirm that they are not hearing Philip and it's not my problem? Can somebody, if anybody, now I hear you again. Yeah. Now I don't.
Josh, it seems like Philip turned off his microphone on his end because he's not muted on Zoom.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you now.
Wait, let's do it without the speakers. It's better. Yeah. So what happened was that you ended up dehumanizing the people. They were doing one task over and over again, and they were being told by a system where to go, what to do. And they weren't responsible for the patient anymore because the tasks were split up into 10 different or 15 different people. The nurses hated it because the monetary system, with its demand for increased profit and economies of scale, dehumanized the work. So the nurses became robots and hated every minute of it because they didn't have time to build a relationship with the patient. The patients hated it because they were dealing with 15 different nurses. Each nurse was only doing one task, and they didn't know them. There was no relationship, and they had to keep on explaining their conditions over and over again to 15 different people. And so it ended up with a complete disaster. Anyway, this guy, Joost de Blok, decided, well, this is crazy. He was actually a trained nurse. And he worked for one of these large nursing companies. And he said, we need to go back to the beginning and form smaller, local, self-managed teams with all the skills within the team, with a nurse looking after the needs of a complete group of patients herself or himself. So you start to reintroduce responsibility with one person responsible for a group of people. So what would happen is that the nurse would start by sitting down with the patient, getting to know them, and actually taking responsibility for and dealing with all of the needs of the patient. And therefore, what within this team, they got rid of central functions, so all the central scheduling and accounting and all these things that we have in our organizations, which actually control what happens in the coalface. They redistributed the responsibility to individuals to start to get them responsible for the needs of the patient. And it was unbelievable, Josh, because not only, so what they would do is they say, 1 minute, what do you need? Okay, some of these needs are happening when I'm not there. Okay, have you got family that might be able to help? And very often there was family that was disengaged, that wasn't taking responsibility for their own loved ones. So these nurses engaged the family and started to rebuild family around meeting the needs of the patients. It went even further than that. If there was no family, they said, have you got neighbors? They would knock on the neighbor's door and say, look, I can't be there all the time because I've got other patients whose needs I meet. Could you, because you're locally, because would you meet the needs when I can't get there? And neighbors volunteered. These were not relations, they volunteered because people have this innate desire for meeting the needs of others. We are social beings, we care for other people naturally. And what ended up happening is the model change. It was actually small self-managing teams of up to 10 people, with each nurse dealing with the needs of so many patients. And it worked out to be a lot cheaper. Even it was cheaper because you're engaging family, you're engaging community and neighbors. And over the next, this was I think 2016, or maybe 2012, within 10 years, the whole of the district nursing function within Holland moved to this local self-managing teams, which is what I'm describing. It's meeting needs, it's obligations, and it worked. So we have to rethink the system based on how we can organize ourselves around small local self-managing units that meet the needs of people in a much better way. So in your cello example, you need to work out how many people have got cello needs, what are those needs, and what is the best way of together meeting those needs. You may have a neighbor who's a cellist, you may have a family who's a cellist. Understand the same model that Herzog applied could be applied in any scenario once you have the data available on a ledger.
I'm not sure that I'm grasping what you're describing still, but it sounds to me like there would be a need for a huge bureaucratic centralized authority for making these determinations of matching up needs with capacity to service needs. What if not a large centralized authority that directs cellist to cello student over here? What is the mechanism for making those connections, for allocating?
It will never work from the center. It's too complicated. That's what they tried. You can't coordinate it from the center. It's got to be peer-to-peer. It's got to be local relationships where people know the needs of their neighbors, of their family, and it's not centralized, Josh. That's exactly the point. It's much better. The metaphor that we use for these kind of organizations is a living system, not a machine, because it's natural. It's people meeting the needs of people they love or people they're close to, and therefore you don't centralize. Centralized decision making doesn't work. Once you get rid of the money and the noise and all you know is the need, then anybody can see that need on the register, and they know their neighbors. So that if somebody has a fall next door, that would automatically, you'll see it next door and you'll go straight away because you're available, you're next door, and you'll save the person's life. Because
what if I need something that is made on the other side of the world, and I don't know that person, and that person doesn't know me, and there's no way for them to become aware? There's no personal connection. How does, all right, I get that it's not about exchange, but there is a flow of goods and services still taking place. How does that need get met at a distance?
Okay, the answer is you have to see what Joost de Blok did. So Joost de Blok was a very idealistic type. So he wasn't working in the dog-eat-dog world of competition. He wanted to meet the needs of his patients. So he trained other organizations in Holland to do it his way. Because once your purpose, Josh, is to care for other people, you're not competing anymore. So IP goes. And therefore, if you somebody finds an idea in China, we all care for each other, and therefore I'm not focused on money and profit and IP. I will share that idea because it's going to save lives. And I've got a big issue with this, Josh, because we kill people because of IP. We develop a drug, and therefore we charge stupid amounts of money because of the historical cost which is sunk. And therefore people end up dying because we don't share that knowledge. Once we got the knowledge as to how we should share the life, that should be provided to everybody. Because once money is taken away and the need is there, and therefore we share the ideas. The answer is the person who develops an idea in China trains the person in Lima because we're not threatening each other, we're not competing, we're caring for the needs of others, and therefore it's in my interest to help you because I care for human beings, you care for human beings. Therefore, I will tell you how to do it. So the bottom line is you don't need money to do that because money, in fact, gets in the way.
Okay. I would be being untruthful if I said I get what you're describing, but in the interest of keeping this within, a 2-hour time frame, let me steer this in a different direction. Let's say that we agree upon a system architecture along the lines of what you're describing. What is the path from where we are now to adopting and implementing such a radically different system? How do you envision advocating for and ultimately implementing such a different system? Do you plan on going to an existing political party and convincing them to embrace this model, which is extremely different from anything that they are currently engaged with? Or are you envisioning something that I am more aligned with, which is the idea of building something entirely new from scratch at a small scale, and putting it in motion, with the hope that if it is indeed a better way of doing things, that the results will speak for themselves and will convince people to adopt them freely rather than having them imposed by authority.
Okay, the answer is actually neither of those. Again, the answer is in the Bible. And again, I'm not this person who is. I'm actually scientific, but when I look at problems, I try to find the answers, and I actually saw that the answer was there. So in fact, you find there's the Manna journey starts in Exodus 15. Is actually a similar story around the Paschal Lamb, which has the same principles as the Manna journey of only giving people what they need, of not leaving over tonight. The same principles are in an initial exercise, which happens on Passover as it happens. So what that's telling me is you have to educate first. Because the idea that you say of starting small samples, I've been there, you'll get crushed by the system. That's what the Grimsby pound, what the Wergel was crushed by the Austrian bank. The Grimsby pound was crushed. I'm sure you'll know there are a number of examples of local currencies that tried to do the Giselle idea, and they've all been crushed in one way or the other by the system, because you need something where it's all the need can be provided, and therefore you need a unit that's big enough to provide all the needs. And to take a perfect example would be the United Kingdom. Yeah, you've got energy, you've got food, you've got clothing, you've got land. You need something big enough to do the whole lot. Okay, but you can't go straight to Big Bang. Because as you say, it doesn't work, because people, if I'm right, that jobs suddenly become meaningful because you're trying to meet the needs of other people and to care for other people. Everybody's job is going to change. I'm not going to be an accountant anymore or a lawyer. I'm going to be meeting the needs. I've got to work out what I really do well and whose needs I met. So you have to have a period of education, of thinking it through, where you engage a mass education, where people share these ideas, mull over them, discuss them, build models, build a model of how we got the techniques to build models of how it could work. And that and then that would enable people, and you've got to get, by the way, the political buy-in, okay? Because what I know, I mean, over the course of my career, I had umpteen near-death experiences in business where people tried to crush me. Because that's what, when people are innovative or different, people try to crush them. So we have to get, beginning, enough political buy-in from across the spectrum, so that when there are, because this kind of thing is always going to be difficult to implement, because it's a different model completely. So you have to have enough people to buy into the concept, to share the vision, to understand how it would work. And you almost run a simulation, Josh. You almost, before you go live, you've got to run as close as you can to an full-scale simulation alongside, to show how it would work, to convince people that it could work. But that will only happen, one, when you've got enough people who understand the concept. I can see you understand some of what I'm saying, but you haven't grasped it all. Is that fair? You have an understanding of what I'm saying, but some of it is difficult to understand. Is that fair?
That's fair. Quite a bit of it is still eluding me. Yeah.
But that requires time. What I'm saying, it just needs time and patience that we spend together, grasping and really thinking about how this might work. And then once you've educated people and you've got the political buy-in, then it's a 40-year journey, by the way, in the wilderness. It's not 1 year. I'm talking about from the beginning. This is going to take 40 years to achieve. Okay, so that's, but doesn't mean you don't start, because there are going to be challenges along the way. So this is not a quick fix, but the ledger concept could be, in the Manna journey, it happens overnight. Yeah, so they leave Egypt, they cross the Red Sea, and then the new system is implemented. And there are problems from the beginning. Okay, but I do think that we have to educate. I don't think it takes 40 years to start the ledger. I think the ledger could be built, the concept could be built relatively quickly. But we need to get people engaged in it. What they did in the desert was they brought in as many nations as possible. If you look at the numbers carefully, you find out that the Israelites were maybe 1,000 out of 600,000 people that left Egypt. The rest of them were other people from other sects around the world. So what we're trying to do is engage as many different groups together to form a collective that can meet all the needs. And therefore, you have to get all of that done before you go to a live trial. So I would not advocate a small local, because that's going to be crushed, Josh. This won't work. But I wouldn't suggest going big bang into a massive transition, because that's also going to be crushed. You have to have a period of education, of people grasping the concepts, re-envisaging how they'd operate and modeling it. And once you've got enough people grasped and bought into it, then you can go live.
So, all right, let's say you, Philip, are offering your vision of an alternative system, and I, Josh, am offering a different system, and 100 other people are offering their different systems. So how do we choose which one? Is it essentially a competition of ideas, and whoever attracts the most supporters, that's the solution that gets implemented? Or what is the filtering mechanism for choosing the model that we move toward?
It's got to be scientific, Josh. You've got to have enough data to actually prove that it can work. I told you that the scientific method is the way you do it. So that's why it can't be a small. You take a big pool of data. You then develop your hypothesis, and in my case, you would model it with real people, and people would say, "This is the role I would like to fulfill." Now, I'm not without doing it, Josh. You know, you can do it in a model that is close to reality, but it's not reality. Update device. Okay, I've got a message that's come up. So the answer is you've got to make the decision based on data and proper analysis of the data. So you need to gather a huge amount of data together. People would say, this is what I'd like to do. This is what I could. So you start to put this data into a model and see how it would work. You don't have to do it. So I would provide this. I would provide that. So you make sure that you've got all the needs. What do you need? You need somebody to provide the food, the clothing, the different forms of food. You wouldn't necessarily have to. This is a much more local system, yeah. So the idea is that you want to be self-sufficient. You don't want to be dependent on stuff coming from around the world. That's just too long. It's too damaging to the environment. All kinds of things. You want to be autonomous, because if you're dependent on others, you can get things like hackers who take the system down in a way that all the retailers are finding. So the answer is,
do cars exist in this world? Do smartphones exist in this world?
The answer is you need to look at the need, okay, and whether now if the problem is transporting people around, yeah, and caring for the environment, I think there were much. It's not for me to decide, but I think there are many better answers than the mass production on production lines of the same car umpteen times, which dehumanizes the job. The job is meaningless, and the product has to be sold to people, which means that you use advertising to trigger brainwash people, and you use money which doesn't exist to buy things which they don't want. So in this, we have to start recognizing. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I don't use a car now. I'm happy with underground. I'm happier. I'm much happier using the buses and the underground, because I'm with other people, I'm engaging, and it's much more communal. It's much more, and I think it's better for all of us. It's sociable, and this concept of driverless cars is bonkers. It's complete.
I agree with all of that, and it may very well be that we would all be better off in a world without private automobiles. But the reason I asked the question was not to debate the pros and cons of automobiles, but rather, since you're advocating for a local system, it seems to me that a logical consequence of that is that we would have at least according to certain metrics, a drastic diminution of standards of living, because anything that cannot be produced locally, a bus, a public transportation system, none of those things could possibly be produced at a local level. So it would. So it's
you misunderstand me. We have to build relationships, but if we decided within, let's say, I said the unit might be the United Kingdom, for want of a better word. There are within places in the United Kingdom places that can manufacture cars. So that's why you have to. So you're not limited to the capabilities of your local community. You do want to build families, communities, a nation, but you can also, as long as you share values, this is the key. If you share values, let's say with Cardiff, I don't know, with London, Cardiff can produce the cars. It doesn't matter that they're not produced locally, because as long as they're produced in the same value set, and they're caring for their people, and they're meeting the needs of their people, and they're following the same model of no money and care for people. But on the ledger, the bit that I probably haven't explained to you, this ledger is completely transparent. So it's not just the need. You'd actually see the complete history of how a particular product was built, and therefore you'd be able to see that the needs of the people involved are being met. So if cars can be produced, or buses for that matter can be produced, that care for the environment, that care for people, and the value set is not contaminating our value set, you don't have to do it in London, or it can be done elsewhere, as long as the people that you're introducing into your community share your value set. And are not. What goes wrong is when stuff is produced in China, where people are not being cared for to the same extent, where the workers are not living in. I'm not saying they are. I'm not accusing China of anything, but where the value set is the same, where people matter, where the environment matters, where you're not damaging the planet, you're not damaging people. Then it doesn't matter if you share resources with those people, because they're not contaminating your values. If, on the other hand, these people are not are abusing people, are abusing the planet, they will contaminate your value set. So do you find that's why you've got to find enough partners in this system to provide whatever you think you need? That's why it takes time to put it all together, because you need to work out how each of the needs are going to be met by people with the same value set.
Okay. Why, but do you assume that it's more likely that you will have commonality of values between people who live nearby as opposed to people who live far away? I, for example, spent 12 years living in Knoxville, Tennessee, a place that I dearly love, but that has a great number of people with opposite value systems from my own. So I'm not clear that I understand the interaction between community of values versus proximity.
Okay, in this system, it's not about coercion. We're moving away from the current structure, which is power, forcing rights, where I force people either by money or by the power of law. I judge other people rather than helping them to judge themselves, and divisive. So your question is this: is what happens if people don't buy into the value set? The answer is in these companies, they naturally leave. Josh, you don't need to force them away, because once you engage in conflict resolution, and it happens within these companies, but Lulu talks about it, yeah? If you don't fit into the level of consciousness, you don't fit into the value set, you move, not because you're forced to, because you don't feel comfortable with people on that value set. So if you don't need to be forced to move, you naturally move because you don't feel that you love them, that you care for them, that you're engaged with them, yeah? So it happens naturally because of the shared values that are so you don't need to force people out, they just naturally move. But you will get some people, and there's no question, there are some people who are not as conscious, who are at different levels of consciousness. They want to force, they want power, they want to kill, whatever. Those people will not fit in, and therefore those people will naturally either that they decide to share the values and to work with people to be educated. If they're not prepared to, they will move away, because they won't be, not because people will force them to, but they just won't fit in.
Okay. Let's make another little course adjustment here. And because we haven't yet talked about your main project these days, which is a streaming platform. I would assume that you've obviously spent a lot of time and thought envisioning an alternate reality that does not yet exist. And of course, the question is, how does that become reality if it is indeed a better idea, a better system? I would assume that the fact that you have chosen to create a streaming network relates in some way to this mission. How do you, what was it? Why did you choose to create a streaming platform as opposed to political advocacy, engaging with government?
Good question. The answer is that Lulu worked this out. Leaders change when you move from a hierarchical, coercive model to a non-coercive, non-judgmental model, which is more conscious, which cares for people, cares for nature. The way leaders operate changes. They move away from our current CEOs. Are decision makers. They make decisions at the center. They sit in an office in the center, and they have power, and they have lots of papers come to them, and they make lots of decisions. And they're doers. They are doers. They're actually involved in actually doing stuff. Whereas once you move to the next level of consciousness, people become advisors, educators, inspirers. So the role of people in that model is to educate, to inspire, and to model as best you can the new way of operating. Now, what I realized is in order to achieve the scale of change, because I believe that the system is so far off the mark that we need a complete move to a system about needs and obligations without money, where you don't get the noise of money. I've got to educate people, inspire people that it's right. And it's going to take time, Josh. You've only heard this for an hour and a half. Yeah, this takes time, and we need to work with the kids, by the way, because I think that the kids are the ones that are more likely to absorb these kinds of ideas because they're not set in their ways in the same way as us adults are. We've all had experiences. We've been tarnished by the system. Many of us have been crushed by the system, and therefore we are not as open-minded. So I'm working on education, on inspiration, and not doing. I don't want to do. This is the point. When we talked about the Bristol pound, yeah, that was doing on a small scale, and that will get crushed by the system. So I see my role and the role of other people that want to get involved in this is to discuss and inspire and to start to share a new vision so that people can understand. We explain it as obviously I'm not doing it particularly well, otherwise you'd have understood it. It's obviously not as simple as it needs to be. So I've got to get better as explaining the ideas as simply as I can, so that these things, can go viral, Josh. That happens in this world. We got with the technology, it doesn't need in the dark times of the past, we didn't have the smartphone, we didn't have internet, and therefore to communicate with 7 or 5 billion people was impossible. Now with Facebook, all of these, there is the capability of getting messages around and properly influencing people in a way that we couldn't in the past. And therefore, what the platform is, we want to go viral in the end. We want to share these ideas. We want to work with people like you, Josh, or people to see who like the ideas, who are prepared to explore the ideas, who are not. You've listened to me, Josh. And I thank you for that. And you've been developing my ideas and helping me. And a lot has come from this for me. By the way, I've gained from your dialogue. So thank you very much for that. But that's what we need to do. We need to do dialogue and discussion and peer-to-peer discussion, where we have the one thing about it, I would have liked more people to engage. Maybe next time we can have more people engaged in a discussion. The more people involved, the better. But the platform is just that. It's to try and get these ideas out there. It's not going to be the politicians. The politicians that we've got, Josh, I'm sure you'd agree, the whole system, if you think about it, is not scientific. So we hear about growth of 0.1% that no one understands, inflation of 2%, we all know it's near 25%, of unemployment. The numbers are not there. The system of governance, Josh, isn't working. Again, it's simply not working. It's another fork that needs to be revisited. And therefore, the idea is not simply it's to work with everybody that's prepared to listen and start to get them engaged in a discussion, in a dialogue. And that's what the platform's about.
Okay, well, that part I certainly resonate with. I think I view my own role as primarily that of communication. My work is mainly concerned with advocating a specific economic perspective developed by someone else 100 years ago. I am adding nothing or not much to a perspective that is already more or less fully formed, but has existed for 100 years and has not yet been embraced. And that means one of two things. It means either it's not the right set of ideas, or that the way of communicating it effectively has not yet been discovered. I believe it's the latter. I believe that the ideas are good. They're the best ideas I know of, and that's why I've chosen to make it my life's work to advocate for it. And it can be a very challenging, frustrating, humbling process to attempt to communicate something and not do as well as you would like. But also, I happen to have spent many years as a musician, and what I learned from doing that is that you have to practice and you have to repeat, not tens of times, not hundreds of times, not thousands of times. Like I once sat there trying to think about the number of notes that I've played in my lifetime. Just an interesting little thought experiment, and I don't even remember the order of magnitude that I estimated it to be, but it's a huge number, and that's sort of how I view the challenge of advocacy of a completely new worldview. You're advocating for a worldview that does not yet have concrete existence, and I'm doing the same thing, and we're both attempting to communicate effectively, and that's hard.
It's interesting because there have been societies that operated without money. It's not quite right. Yeah? Villages operate without money, families operate without money. So there is plenty of examples of systems without money. We haven't got an overall society, so it has worked before. What has changed is, as you said, in technology. Suddenly, and this is critical, Josh, there's nowhere to hide. What I'm saying to you, we live in a cruel world where abuse is hidden, where people hide behind money and abuse people and abuse the environment. What I'm talking about is a transparent ledger without the noise, without the cloud, without the obfuscation of money. And it's much simpler to understand because you haven't got this number which no one understands in the way. You've got a simple need of people, the way people are being treated. You can start feeding data about human biometrics. Are people's health being looked after? Are their heart rates good? Are their weights good? This is not Big Brother. This is loving, caring society. And what I'm saying to you is it's going to be much simpler, Josh, without money. It actually sounds, it's not, because we're so trained and programmed the fork into money happened maybe 300 years ago, whatever it is. And we've never turned back. And so many things have changed. The technology has changed. The communication has changed. We haven't revisited that fundamental question of how do we ensure that people's needs are met. And I think it is simple. I haven't explained it well enough, otherwise you would grasp it. But the problem is as well, Josh, is you've also got ideas that you've had because you worked all your life on Giselle. And by the way, Giselle influenced me. You had a significant influence on me. It made me realize when you introduced me to your colleagues, the group, that I realized that money wasn't working. I didn't know quite how problematic it was. So all of these things, the difference that I have is I'm versatile. I have no preconceived. I didn't wake up and suddenly think Giselle was the right answer. I've gone through iterations. I'm completely malleable for some reason. I'm able to turn on a sixpence, and therefore I iterate very quickly. And that's why I think this concept of no money and recording needs in a transparent way, I think is game changing. But the idea is I've got to convince people that I'm right.
Yes, and maybe that's something we can talk about for the last 10 minutes or so here, which is, how do you know if you're on the right track or not? What metrics, what data do you gather and evaluate to tell yourself if what you're doing is solid, holds together, it makes sense, is capable of moving people? How do you judge? I have my own answer to this question, but I'd like to know, how do you judge the results of what you're working on?
Well, in my case, you probably won't like the answer, but I found it in the Bible. I wasn't I didn't know what the answer was. I did not know the answer. I found scientifically some messages which I'm trying. It's a puzzle almost. It's a puzzle that I'm trying to unravel. And the more that the pieces fit together, the more it translates scientifically. So I look at what the words mean, and I then develop my hypothesis. But then I've got to take the hypothesis and test it in the real world scientifically to make sure that the hypothesis is right. If it doesn't work, which I'm testing it by talking to lots of people. So my ideas have been moved from the idea with originally about social purpose without any real idea what social purpose was, then to an understanding the problem was money, and then to people money, and then to no money. This is a journey that I've moved on. And the reason why I know I'm getting closer is because the text in the Bible works better. I'm not fixing it. It's been there for thousands of years and it actually works. But I'm not relying on the text to say because it's in the Bible. I just say that's why I know I've got it right. But again, if things don't work, I can go back and iterate to test the model. But the key is I don't need people to believe in God to actually do this. I need people to understand the ideas, to be able to see that they work empirically in the real world. And where I got it from, it doesn't bother them. As long as it works, that's the beauty of the scientific method. It works whether or not you believe in God. So therefore, effectively, I believe that I'm getting closer and closer. And you helped me, but I looked at the meeting that we had with your group, with Clive Menzies and Alex were there, okay? And I looked at, and the paper that Alex referred to is very, very similar to me. They got there in a completely different way. When different people are tackling the same problem and come up with the same solution from completely different parts of the world, you're onto something. And I'd like to work with Clive and Alex if there is. I don't know if they're actually on the call, but I'd like to work with them. If not, could you reintroduce me to them, Josh? Because they are working in the same kind of way as we are.
Yeah, well, what you just said for me is a very important idea and something that I have arrived at myself, which is, so I asked you, how do you judge whether or not what you're doing makes sense and is working or not? My answer is that I put a lot of stuff out into the world, whether it's an article, whether it is a video, whether it's a conversation, and then I see what comes back to me. If nothing comes back, then maybe it's not resonating, maybe it's not the right idea. But if a whole bunch of stuff starts coming back from all different places and all different people and reinforces what I was putting out, then I take that as a sign that I'm heading, if not in the precise right direction, at least generally in a good direction. And that over time, if you iterate that process of putting energy out, observing what comes back at you and adjusting based on that, that maybe that's a process for arriving at a destination you could never have anticipated at the beginning of the journey. So that's sort of my approach. And it sounds to me like perhaps it's similar to your approach.
Completely. It's again the scientific method. Once you've developed the hypothesis and tested it, they do peer-to-peer reviews. They call it peer review. The paper is distributed to a lot of other scientists to make sure that they agree with it. And the world doesn't need to be limited to a few scientists. And part of the problem is we overcomplicated it. So what we've done is, fortunately, I've got Byron sitting by my side here. We're getting huge interaction with the Manna journey, Josh. We've been doing it for a relatively short period. We're getting, they'll tell you, hundreds of thousands a month. Huge numbers, which means that we've got something right, Josh. Yeah, people are resonating. The ideas we're amazed at the numbers very quickly. If I've got this right, Josh, we'll be at millions and then hundreds of millions and then billions. And then I know I've got it right. So we're talking about the same. We need peer-to-peer connection. And if the ideas are right, they will resonate. That the system will vibrate at the resonant frequency. It'll become, and that's why we got the right tools. I've got, my guys are genie-eyed, parents by my side. No, they want. That's why we haven't gone with YouTube. We want the data. The answer is in the data. We need to make sure we're engaging with people of all ages, of all groups, to make sure that we talk to everybody. Now, because it's the Manna Journey is our own platform, we can see the data. We can see who we're connecting to and who is actually understanding our message. And we realize that we haven't been doing enough for the young people. So therefore, we're not going to rely on YouTube or TikTok. That's why the Manna Journey itself has got large numbers of subscribers and is getting bigger and bigger. So the way we're going to do this is with genuine peer-to-peer review, which enables us to iterate and to get better and better. And then effectively, where we've got it right, hopefully, whoosh, it's out there and we've got proper engagement from the leaders.
Okay, well, I agree that we are operating in an unprecedented information environment where if you hit on the right recipe, the potential is limitless. And I wish you the best of luck in advancing your perspective. And before we sign off, why don't you tell people where they can find you? And we will, of course, add that to the description of the video when it is posted on YouTube. So where can people find you?
Discover TMJ. Discover the word discover. The Manna Journey, I realized people couldn't spell Manna. So I've got the shortcut is discover, which everyone knows how to spell, followed by TMJ. That will take you to the website and to the platform. And then we want you to subscribe. We're not charging money. There's no paywall here. We want your ideas. We want you to engage. And if we ask you to subscribe to Discover TMJ and get engaged in the discussion and start to promote the ideas, and this has to go viral, as you know, and that's why I think we both see that the system's fundamentally broken, and I think you've talked about. I think it's going to collapse. I don't know when, but I think it's relatively soon. The key is when that happens, we need to not repeat what happened in 2008, where the banks completely replicated the system that we currently have. We have to be ready for when that happens to start a new conversation, and that's what we're trying to achieve. DiscoverTMJ.com is the place. Please subscribe.
All right. Philip, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Pleasure to...
Thank you. Thank you for your time, Josh, and thank you for listening.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.